There was a build-up to this in terms of Israel's public messaging of an expectation of an escalation in Lebanon, the kind of operation that was conducted with the pagers and subsequently is, as most people have acknowledged, something that requires a lot of lead time, perhaps many, many years. Now, first, let's just acknowledge what this mass maiming use of terror on the sovereign soil of a foreign nation, what that means, both in terms of the crossing of yet another red line, apparently again with impunity. And if you step back beyond this West Asia, Middle East, Levant arena, what this could do in terms of how this kind of warfare will be deployed elsewhere, because I would say we can rest assured, but it's anything but that. We can move very nervously, wherever you are, knowing that this line has been crossed. So that's the big picture. Going back to what this means and what happens next, there was a lot of speculation that you don't deploy this kind of an asset unless you intend to go there to a broader escalation, which is clearly where we are. Israel has conducted significant strikes also inside Beirut. There has been a missile response by Hezbollah. It's a very fluid situation. What could happen next? What seems to be the case right now is we're in a very escalatory cycle initiated by Israel, and that Netanyahu wants to push for a significant war confrontation on that front. But that might not be the course of events. It might be that this is another peak, that the nature of the intensity of the exchanges has gone up a significant level, but it kind of pauses there for a period of time. And let's look at what that might play out as. We know that Hezbollah has been infiltrated. Its systems have been penetrated. Something is going on there. We therefore could surmise that this is a good time for Israel to maximize the attack on Hezbollah. But, and the but here is also significant, much as Hezbollah has been weakened, it's lost people, senior commanders. Interestingly, an Israeli kind of intel commentator, Yossi Melman, made the comment that when you lose senior people, it's also an opportunity to refresh your ranks. Some of these have been around for a long time, but this is a depletion of the command personnel, and with the Beeper attack, that seems, in addition to targeting people who are not military operatives, that is almost certainly the case, and we know that civilians were killed in what was a horrendous attack, not an audacious attack, as some in the West have tried to claim. But we know that Hezbollah is going to be feeling vulnerable, checking its intelligence system. However, does that mean this is now a walk in the park? Far from it. And one of the questions is, are the Israelis and the Americans getting high on their own supply, drinking their own Kool-Aid and telling themselves, now we've got these guys where we want them, the axis of resistance is collapsing, and the fact that after the Fuad Shukr assassination, after the Haniyeh extrajudicial killing, they're too scared to respond. The other way of looking at this is, why would they fall into Israel's trap? This is not a party, this is not an axis that lacks strategic patience. So I think it can be both things. There can be a serious hit to that movement, and there can still be a significant capacity that it will want to deploy at a time that is most propitious for that movement. Israel, I think, will open itself up to finding out the very hard way that the axis of resistance still has significant capacity, not only Hezbollah. We've seen the Houthi strikes, we've seen the Iraqi Popular Mobilization Units, Iran itself. So there is the prospect here of a major escalation. That's the moment we're in at the moment. But something else that shouldn't be forgotten is that in asymmetric warfare, you as the party fighting against, and let's not make bones about this, Israel is a very significant military power. It is a nuclear-armed state. So if you're on the other side of that equation, then you, to a significant degree, rely on the more powerful party scoring own goals, overreaching. And that's been a significant part of the story of the last year, right? Israel has done tremendous damage to itself. I'm not going to mention its moral standing because that shouldn't have been a question a year ago anyway. But let's talk about its legal standing in the world after the ICC request for arrest warrants, the ICJ rulings. Its economy has taken a big hit. Not a fatal hit, but Israel doesn't have a resistance economy. These things take their toll. Reputational standing, diplomatic standing, the investment deals that aren't being made, the people who are leaving the country. And then there's the military piece of this, which is, does Israel really have the wherewithal to conduct a major ground operation right now? Reservists who have done, in the Israeli military, reservists who have done extended periods of duty, many not showing up now. So all of that has to be factored in. Stories of asylum seekers who were treated appallingly in Israel from African countries now being drafted, Haaretz has an expose on this, being drafted into the military, sent to Gaza with the promise that maybe you can have permanent residency here. Where does that leave everything? Okay, Israel failed to restore its lost deterrence and to fundamentally shift the battlefield balance of power in everything it's done in Gaza. One of the interesting things one can think about is how unpenetrated, uninfiltrated Hamas has been through this period. So that hasn't succeeded. Israel hasn't achieved its war aims in Gaza. Destroying everything when you're a huge military with the backing of the largest military in the world, the US, when it's as much America's war, and all you can do is destroy, is not a sign of strength, actually. So I think much of what we're seeing in Lebanon is Netanyahu worried, reputationally, regionally, internationally, but also domestically, that Israel could no longer do what's written right at the top of the tin. We are the place of shelter. We provide safety and security for Jews. It's the most dangerous place in the world today for Jews to live. And I think the hope is, and many will say in a week of action in Lebanon, it's done more to achieve that than almost a year in Gaza against Hamas. But only if it can return its residents to the north, only if it can sustain that. Because a week is a tactical thing. It's not yet a strategic thing. And in that respect, as long as Hezbollah can send missiles, send rockets, then the residents can't return to the north. An unprecedented thing, by the way, in the history of the Zionist state, that you have these people displaced for such an extended period of time. That is the equation we face at the moment. Israel in a multi-front war. It's expanded its destructive operations across the West Bank. It started in the north of the West Bank. It says it's going to go further. Those operations are trying, I think, to create some of that scorched earth, unlivable for Palestinian conditions that, of course, we see in Gaza. But it's not achieved those things yet. So this is very high risk for Israel, which is the party driving the escalation. I would argue it's also high risk for the US. Israel may well now say, okay, now you have a choice, Hezbollah. Try and play to the Hezbollah internal domestic Lebanese dilemma. Now you have a choice. If you pull back, this doesn't have to go any further. And in so doing, Israel will be trying to achieve a delinking of what is going on with the rest of the axis of resistance, primarily in this respect Hezbollah, and what's going on in Gaza. That delinkage hasn't succeeded. There was a different delinkage, of course, one led by the Americans for the last years, started in an aggressive fashion by Trump, continued without question by Biden, which was to delink Palestinian rights, freedoms, to marginalize Palestinians from the rest of the regional expanse, to build that Israeli-Arab state coalition, ignoring the plight of the Palestinians. That succeeded, but this delinkage hasn't, and I don't think the expectation should be that it will. So where also this leaves America, as we come so close to an election, in a trap of their own making. I don't think one has ever seen such a clear shadowing of American major battle force deployment, warship deployment, aligning with what Israel is doing on the battlefield. Now you have these strange noises coming out of Washington, D.C. We're trying to de-escalate. What are you talking about? I don't think there's a sentient human being who can look at what you have done and what you are still doing now and not laugh out loud at the claim that the US doesn't want war, is trying to de-escalate. Now, it may well be that the Biden-Harris, and especially the Harris campaign, really don't want this, but they have handed the keys to Netanyahu by demonstrating complete willingness, at the cost of American interests, I would argue, to allow for total impunity and for this escalation. Two other things to factor in here. The timing comes just before what is normally a week of intense diplomacy in New York at the United Nations, the meeting of the annual UN General Assembly High-Level Week, as it's called. You have a new Iranian president. That Iranian president has shown every sign that he wants to look at, can we do things a bit differently? Israel, of course, has tried to undermine that, has for a long time tried to pull the US into that confrontation with Iran. I think it's a stretch, it's a long shot, but there might be an effort here to try and calm things that at least keep things at this intensified level, or a bit less if possible, but don't go further. Lastly, Israel is in a multi-front war of attrition. It is already there, and that is not its strong suit. So there are decisions to be made, and Israeli society, just as it got behind the attacks, the relentless assault on Gaza, will probably get behind this, but it doesn't cover up those divisions, that polarization inside Israel, not over the rights of Palestinians or indeed Lebanese people, but over whether this can work for Israel. And Israel's stuck in a war of attrition. And Israel, that cannot have a realistic strategy because it is an Israel which eschews non-zero-sum political outcomes. So this isn't war as politics by other means to achieve political ends. This is war in order to continue war, in order to try and achieve a zero-sum outcome, which is absolutely beyond the parameters of what is realistic. And that is the hole that Israel is digging itself deeper in, unfortunately at huge cost to Palestinians, Lebanese, and many other people.